Testing, testing. Can you hear me? Testing, testing. Hey, thank you for joining. Can you hear me? Just testing out my microphone. Let me know if you can hear me. Hi, Francois. Thanks for joining. From Belgium, thanks for joining so far away. I mean, I'm so far from you out here, based out of California. What time is it in Belgium, Francois? We'll give it a few minutes before we start. Midnight. That's great. Well, I appreciate you joining. Okay, we'll start at around, give it a few more minutes until we have more folks joining, and then we'll go ahead and start off. How is everyone doing, by the way? All right, so okay, we can go ahead and get started in about, give it about 2 minutes. I appreciate you guys joining and waiting. All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining the live session. Let me know where you're watching from, what's your name, and any questions you have, put it in the chat. First off, I'll be covering some of the updates I'd like to share with you, and then we'll do a live Q&A session. Okay, so definitely put your comments in the chat. All right, so Bitcoin price, we're seeing some nice upward movement. Bitcoin, we've seen hover at around the 105,000. You know, Bitcoin, when we think about it, you know, it hit an all-time record, 112,000. This is all from just institutional confidence, ETF investments. You know, we've seen a lot of financial institutions buying up Bitcoin, like BlackRock, Fidelity. It's tons of ETFs right now that are trying to get involved. Bank of America, Chase, you name it. You know, this is a strategic shift towards digital assets, and you know, eventually we're going to hear more about stable coins. You know, Texas Senate, you know, advances the bill to establish strategic Bitcoin reserve, and now it's headed towards the governor's approval for finalization. And the moment we hear Texas formally getting an SBR approval, I think that's really going to set things, you know, to a new standard. You know, Texas, you know, in terms of gross domestic output, that's a state that drives a lot of the U.S.'s economy. So a big contributing state when you look at the United States as a whole. Bitcoin exchange reserves, there's just a limited supply of what's available with Bitcoin. And we haven't really seen that factor in yet with the demand for Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin going up. But this is all just driving, price of Bitcoin to that all-time high, 112,000. Most of you are wondering, why is it that, Bitcoin is like, slowing down when we look at it through the lens of like the last 7 days. Okay, so then looks like Scrooge. Okay, thank you for joining, Scrooge, from Germany. Okay, so we have Francois from Belgium. We have Scrooge from Germany. That's great. I'm out here, California. I just returned from the Bitcoin conference, so that was definitely an eye opener. Was a great experience. Just learning a lot about what the latest updates with Bitcoin is, the entire ecosystem. So not only is it about, financial updates with Bitcoin, but we also got, political updates. The Trump team was there. We also got a social update as well, where we had Ross Ulbricht, providing his case. But it touched on various aspects, from social aspects, financial aspects, political aspects, and even like wealth building aspects with Michael Saylor presenting. So that was definitely a great experience. So Francois, why are the miners lagging? Any reasons? So definitely great question. I think a lot of us are wondering, why is it that we're not seeing a positive correlation? And there's a reason for that. I'll cover that, why the miners are, a bit delayed, but that's what's expected. Looking at the prior historical run for like the miners, same deal. And if, the same performance shows, then that means, miners are going to be off to the races. But I'm going to show you some technicals as we go through the latest updates. So here's an interesting survey from Mike Alfred. So which price will we see first? So just again, this survey is based off of, the Bitcoin prophet Josh Mandell. He became very popularized, based on his prediction of, Bitcoin hitting 80 something thousand at one point, and on the dot he got that correct. And now, people, are wondering whether his next forecast is going to be correct at 444,000. But what will hit first, 84,000 or 444,000? What this is saying is, out of like 4.4 thousand votes, we have 58% predicting that we'll have Bitcoin hit close to 500,000 first before we hit that support of 84,000. So that just shows how bullish we are with the price of Bitcoin. And let's take a look at, just the history of Bitcoin. So, obviously every 4 years we get a halving event. 2012, what happened? We saw a big run up. That's when the price of Bitcoin was still in that price discovery phase. In fact, Bitcoin is still in a price discovery phase, for the next 20 to 100 years. It'll just keep going up with volatility, of course. And 2016, what happened? We saw a big run up as well. And then 2020, we saw a big run up as well. So where we are right now, we recently just broke through the prior resistance from 2020's last big peak. So we haven't even seen, the recent bull cycle, go up yet. Of course, over the course of time, with Bitcoin maturing, it becomes less and less volatile, which is why it's beginning to attract a lot more investors and financial institutions and governments. But that doesn't mean that it can't break out again. Of course, the returns are going to be not as significant, but there will likely be a run up. Why? Because of the design of Bitcoin. Every halving event every 4 years, it becomes more and more difficult for Bitcoin. Basically, it becomes more scarce as a commodity. So how does the system or the design compensate for that? When it becomes more difficult to have or to buy or to acquire, or even the mine, that's when the price actually goes up. All right, so it looks like we have a lot of questions, from Francois, from Elian on, the miners. We'll definitely cover that. I think a lot of us are wondering, why is it that, price of Bitcoin is, touching all-time high, but we're not seeing Bitcoin Treasury stocks, following that same movement? Definitely some great questions. We'll cover that. Cantonese cat, on the weekly chart, here's an interesting post. So, as we reach in the next 6 hours, can Bitcoin hold the current price range? Where it is right now, 105,000. This is going to be a critical moment because if, let's say, Bitcoin closes, tonight, the weekly close, to see whether, the prior resistance becomes a new support, then that's going to be very bullish for Bitcoin. This is all about, a stair-stepping game. We have a stair step here, we climb up to the next step. We have a stair step here, and then, we're just going to, play out the same way. So I think this is definitely going to be an indicator for the next 6 hours. If Bitcoin can hold up to that 105,000 or even higher, that's looking very good for this upcoming week for Bitcoin and the stock prices. All right, so we have Jared with questions, Francois with questions. So, we have Moha joining, Amara, and MSTR analysis. So yes, I'm definitely going to cover all of that. We're going to do technicals of the miners. We're going to do technicals of MSTR. I'll be giving to you my technical analysis predictions of all of these stocks. So thank you for joining. We're going to definitely cover all of that. So one thing I wanted to call out is Josh Mandell's post. He actually posted this yesterday. So this is based off of another person's post in that, the next leg up starts Monday, which is what this person posted yesterday. This drop was perfectly timed. So basically what we saw with that, that drop back, from like January all the way to like April, boy, he's saying it's just perfectly timed. And we've been climbing up since then. And we're having like some short-term consolidation going on. But what he's saying is that the next leg is going to start. Josh, he responded. And Josh, most of you, if you don't know, he's like, the known Bitcoin prophet where he's been forecasting it, right? He's 1 for 1 so far. His next prediction is 444,000. Whether 84,000 hits first or 444,000, that's up for debate right now. But, Josh Mandell did forecast that we're going to get to that next 444,000 milestone. So what he's saying is that last night, he was saying if we get above 105,000, then, we're going to, have, upward movement. But if we don't close out by 105,000, then, things will look a little difficult. What's key is right now, Bitcoin is slowly going up 105,622. That's definitely a good sign, especially as the markets are going to be opening up tomorrow. I think that we're headed for the right direction as the last week during the Bitcoin conference, we had some pullbacks minus, Monday. All right, so then most of you are, asking about, why is it that the miners are underperforming right now? But just based on fundamentals, I think looking at the technicals, we'll be able to answer a lot of the whys. Why is this, happening with certain Bitcoin treasury stocks? But just based on fundamentals, one thing to keep in mind is, here's, the top companies all around the world. So, we hear about MetaPlanet, that's the first, out of like the top 10 companies, these are all US based companies, right? Coinbase, number 9. But MetaPlanet, number 11, with 7,800 Bitcoins. They're quickly stacking sats, Semler Scientific as well. But when you look at, let's focus on like the less than the top 10, we'll be covering a lot about, strategy, 580,000. They are definitely the pioneers, the leading titan of this industry right now. They started about 5 years ago stacking sats. No other company has done that besides, just individual investors, retail, and also Satoshi. I mean, Mara, I mean, they've been, stacking sats as well, getting close to about 50,000 Bitcoin. I think as we head into February, we may very well announce that, that 50,000 milestone, or even before February, we'll cover the latest updates with Mara as well. 21 Capital, Jack Mallers, I mean, stacking sats as well, 36,000. Riot Platforms, they've been in the game for quite some time, but getting to that 20,000 Bitcoin is definitely a big milestone achievement. It's only going to get more and more difficult for companies to get even above 10,000, let alone even get to 20,000. It's only going to get more and more difficult as price of Bitcoin goes up. CleanSpark, 12,000 Bitcoins. And here's one thing, CleanSpark, they're mining all of their Bitcoins at a cost basis of like 40,000 per Bitcoin. So the return margins are quite significant when you look at it from a mining perspective with, the cost they pay for, the cost for just mining overall. But as Bitcoin price continues to grow, the return margin is going to be great, and that's really going to add value to these Bitcoin Treasury companies. So just keep in mind, these companies are HODL-based companies. So definitely we haven't seen that factored in yet just from the share price alone. All right, so just looking at the chat, just looking at Francois's question, why are the miners lagging? So, key thing is, why are they lagging? We'll definitely cover that, and I'm going to answer that question as we cover the technical analysis. But just looking at, another posting from HODL 15 Capital, here's the Bitcoin supply and demand. So look at how much Bitcoin so far is mined in the year 2025. So we have about, close to 70,000 Bitcoin. But, within that range of 2025, how much of the Bitcoin has been bought up? So you got like over 200,000, let alone just for financial institutions, ETFs and strategy alone, they've already bought up 200,000 Bitcoin while there was only 70,000 Bitcoin mined. So, the rate of Bitcoin's mined versus the rate of companies buying up Bitcoin on the exchanges, there's a big disparity or a difference. This is going to lead to a supply shock, when we compare rate of mining versus rate of purchase with these stocks. Also, we see, El Salvador, Tether buying up, Bitcoin as well, and excluding public companies like Metaplanet, Semler Scientific. Soon, Donald, DJT, Trump Media is going to be buying up Bitcoin, and $2.5 billion approval, to buy up Bitcoin. When you equate that into the amount of Bitcoin that can be purchased, that's like over 40,000 Bitcoins that can be bought by DJT. So that's going to be another game changer. We look at the state reserve raise. So Arizona, they got their approval with SBR. New Hampshire, the first state that got approval with SBR. Texas, it's only a matter of time where, the governor is going to sign that into law. I think this is really going to drive new this is going to be the big domino that causes that big domino effect. As soon as Texas gets that domino to fall down, we're going to see all of these states with SBR proposals run through the races to speed up, to get approval at the state level to acquire Bitcoin with the state level's treasury. Here's an interesting list of purchases with Bitcoin. So Michael Saylor today, he continues to post, orange is his preferred color. So one of the key things that I see with strategy is that for every 2 weeks of single digit purchases, when I see single digit purchase, I'm talking about like single digits in the thousands, right? So like, May 19, 7,000 Bitcoins, May 26, 4,000 Bitcoin. So what happened before that? 13,000 Bitcoin purchase. So when you look at April, we saw 2 weeks where it was 3,000 Bitcoin, 6,000 Bitcoin. What happened after that? Those 2 weeks of single digit purchases, it was coupled with like, 15,000, 22,000, 20,000. So I definitely do think that June 1st, Saylor might start off with a big bang with, at least a minimum of 10,000 Bitcoin purchase. Can it be 15,000 or 20,000? I think there's a 33% chance of that happening. So definitely some huge upside with Saylor and, his continuous purchase. We look at the history of strategy. I mean, he continues to stack sats. I mean, since 2020 to now, it hasn't changed since. The only difference is now he's able to acquire more fiat just based on the belief in Bitcoin. The psychology is changing. And this is why, and this is how he is able to buy more Bitcoin. Just more people are beginning to believe and embrace Bitcoin. And Strategy is a company that hedges Bitcoin at a large number, so people like this investment play and believe in the Bitcoin story, in that it's not going away. The train, keeps going. It won't stop. And, Sailor will continue to add more orange dots to the Bitcoin treasury. And for those reasons, this company was a multi-million-dollar company. It grew to $1 billion company, now to $100 billion company. Eventually it's going to exponentially grow in terms of market capitalization, and at one point we'll get to 1 trillion $1 trillion market cap, and then multi-trillion dollar market cap. I very well see Strategy becoming much bigger than the magnificent seven companies like Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Meta, Google, you name it, it's coming. Here's an interesting update. So I'm going to be covering, DJT stock as well, and that's definitely a stock I want to, point out. Why? You know, why is it that I'm bullish on Trump media? Well, look at the fundamentals. So Trump media, they're front running, Bitcoin. What are they doing? They got an approval of like 2.5 billion deal to buy Bitcoin and hold it as a treasury asset. So Trump, he understands it. His sons believe in it. You know, they're basically, advocating Bitcoin and crypto as the future. Me attending the Bitcoin conference, Eric Trump, Donald J. Trump Jr. I mean, they were just providing really good context. Now the Trump family is part of Bitcoin mining as well. We have companies like Nakamoto being created. Just tons of just companies adopting the Bitcoin Treasury standard. When we look at the top 85 companies, let's say if DJT, if they use that $2.5 billion approval to buy a Bitcoin, that can really put DJT at like number 3 or number 4 currently. Having over 40,000 Bitcoins on their treasury. I think as soon as we hear the company buying up Bitcoin, it could be tomorrow, it could be this week or next week. That can drive up the price of DJT stock as well. So definitely a ticker not to ignore. Here's an interesting post from Crypto Vici. So I think this is really what's going to change the direction for the miners. Obviously, Mara, when Mara price goes up, all of the other Bitcoin miners will follow. Why is that? Because they are the leading industry Bitcoin miner out there. Why is that the case? They have the biggest HODL, they have the biggest hash rate. Yes, when you compare miners from a week to week, a day to day comparison, some miners outperform others, but overall, when you look at the Bitcoin mining industry, it's very competitive, and the companies that have the most HODL are the ones that will be able to withstand, competition. So for those reasons, it's a market where the big miners survive in this case, where they have power to acquire other companies because of their Bitcoin HODL. They're able to leverage, through acquisitions, and with their hash rate, they're able to dominate the smaller plays out there. Now, just looking at Mara, I mean, just look at the first June blocks one. So, 1238 Bitcoins. So that's definitely some record numbers, just hash rate now versus hash rate pre-halving. As hash power grow along with difficulty, only the strongest miners will succeed. Blocks one is the evidence. So you see just the continuous growth in, the hash rate, and then the pool dominion. So Mara is definitely ramping up their hash rate. and I think that's going to result in increase in mining production. I'm thinking that come tomorrow, we're going to hear the big miners, whether it's Monday or Tuesday, we're going to have some record number updates with mining production data. Also, with May being a 31 days, so it'll definitely be better than what we've seen with April numbers. So here's an interesting take as well from Donald Dean, Riot Platforms daily chart. Cup and handle forming, prices finding resistance at the volume shelf. What we saw last week was a pullback, but is that resulting in a cup and handle formation? We've seen this U shape with the cup forming. Also paralleled. We'll talk technicals as well. We see an inverse head and shoulders, but just based on the other icon, based on technical analysis, we see a cup and handle forming. So next target after consolidation is 1009. So looking very bullish for the big time miners. All right, so so to answer the question, why are the miners lagging? I think miners tend to lag behind Bitcoin. That's a given, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't correlate with Bitcoin. Um, I think that we're gonna start seeing a reversal pattern with the miners, especially with Q2. I think Q1 was a month where we saw income loss, and that is because price of Bitcoin actually went down. But when we look at Q2, which Bitcoin closed over 100,000, companies are going to really show revenue growth because of Bitcoin price going up. Let's say Bitcoin makes a bull run even in Q3. So as we have the last month in Q2 in June, I think that it's really going to drive up the price, and that's going to front run the stock price of the miners as Bitcoin reaches new price discovery. And we're beginning to see Bitcoin run up. Just based on the hourly chart, 105,609. So this is definitely a nice upward movement, since last week. Typically with every Bitcoin conference that we have, the price tends to go down. I don't know why that's the case. People were hoping for the opposite, but it didn't play out that way. But what we've seen is that since that run up top of 112,000 May 23, we've been in this Ichimoku cloud, the stormy red cloud, for for quite some time, since May 28th. So we've been hovering below that Ichimoku cloud for 4 consistent days. But key thing is we just broke out of that cloud just today, like last couple hours, under hourly candle. So this is definitely a good sign, as we have markets soon to be open tomorrow in the United States. If Bitcoin can hold up above 105, if it can go up even more, 106, I think we're going to have a very solid week that's going to be coming. So definitely some nice movement with Bitcoin. This is again on the hourly. As we look at it on the daily candle, we're hovering above that Ichimoku cloud, which is key. Every time when Bitcoin goes up, it went from like 76,000 to 112. This was all because we've seen a big bull flag playing out, consolidating, price being experiencing lower lows from like 110 all the way to 74,000 for the many months Bitcoin was consolidating. This is now priming Bitcoin up to start stair stepping, climbing up to test new price discovery. So I think this is definitely a healthy sign of Bitcoin. And where do I see Bitcoin going? I think that in June timeframe, we may even get to like $120,000. As we get to Q3, we may be very well somewhere around like 140,000. Somewhere in 2025. I don't have that secret, that sweet spot when that happens, but sometime around that September or November timeframe, we may very well get to that, $200,000 for the price of Bitcoin. But definitely some huge upside just given where we are. I think, one thing to keep in mind is that we have so many financial institutions buying Bitcoin by by hundreds of millions of dollars. There's so much companies just putting their full, allocation, their cash into Bitcoin. So many companies are, positioning themselves for, the digital market, and I think that's going to be, um, you know, um, all the amazing things. So JG just joined. So thanks for joining. Yeah, so I kind of covered, Bitcoin conference updates, throughout the entire video, but, just to kind of give you a recap, JG, just overall Bitcoin conference. Well, first off, I went with my wife. It was a great experience for both of us. First time ever at a Bitcoin conference, but first day, you know, we had JD Vance presenting. It was so packed. It was hard to even get seats for JD Vance. So missed that. Although we were able to see that, at the conference on TV, JD Vance, but was able to see, you know, um, the miner CEOs speak, also Jack Mallers speak, Lynn speak, Michael Saylor speak, um, also Ross Ulbricht speaking. But one of the key things that I really learned about the Bitcoin conference is that it covered the political aspect. You had the entire Trump team there. Eric Trump, Donald J. Trump, Jr. speaking. It was really nice, and learned that Eric Trump, Eric was into Bitcoin first before his brother was. So lots of credit with Eric Trump, and they were really just talking about how they're super bullish on the Bitcoin ecosystem, which is why now they're part of like Meta Planet, board of directors, and even in the Bitcoin mining sector. Now, they partnered with Hut 8. So definitely you see some huge upside. The Trump family is bullish on the mining ecosystem. What does that mean for Bitcoin miners? That's really going to drive things up. And they got in at the right time. Why? Because the mining sector just experienced a big correction. So we're definitely, you know, going to be running back up. So I definitely see some big upsides. Just on a political scale, we heard from like Senator Cynthia Lummis as well. SBR is is gaining traction. Trump definitely is for it, and just on aside from the political aspects, also learned a lot about where people believe Bitcoin is going to go. So like Eric Trump, Arthur Hayes, everyone, the Trump brothers, they were saying that Bitcoin's going to the moon, but they were forecasting, sometime, towards year end, it's going to go somewhere around 150, 200,000. So definitely some huge bullish, testament with where we are. And one of the things that I found interesting is that Ross, when he spoke, it gave a lot about more on the social aspects. So I really thought that the Bitcoin conference, it was not just about, oh, how high can Bitcoin go, but really I think this was like one of the biggest events ever because Bitcoin surpassed 100K. We have Bitcoin growing. I mean, a lot of the speakers were saying that just comparing how big this event got compared to where it was back in Tennessee last year, you definitely see a big difference. And during that time, we didn't even have like much of the ETFs created. So there's a lot more like, testament. I felt the energy there. Like, it was cool, like being able to speak with, different companies out there. But just the energy, you know, also got to, meet power mining analysis with Anthony Power and McNally Money. So that was cool getting a photo in. Just seeing all of the people that that I actually follow. So it was cool. I hope that answered JG. All right, so it looks like we got Alan joining, Sean. So Alan, let me just show you let me show you something. So I think this will help Katie here. So Katie, we got a CleanSpark symbol, Bitcoin, for we got the Riot lovers. All right, so here's one for you, Sean. Riot is going to the moon. All right, so then we got iron. Iron is gonna go to the moon as well. Here's a nice CleanSpark swag. Sean, I think you're gonna need this here once Riot stock goes up. It's a glow in the dark hat. All right, so yeah, that was overall updates with the conference. Very cool. So Katie, you break your deadlift record yet? So thanks for asking about that. So my recent PR for deadlift, um, yeah, I've been doing that for many years now, in fact, and my current record with deadlift is 515. Bench is 325, and squat is four. I think it's 425 or 430. I forget. I have to look at my phone for that. But thanks for asking. So that's where I'm at. I haven't topped off yet, Katie. I'll continue to increase those numbers, but currently deadlift is 515, trying to get to that 520 and up. All right, so Sean, I wouldn't worry so much, man. Just be patient. Continue stacking. Why? Because I talked to the folks at Riot, and lots of huge upside growth coming. There was a nice display there where you see the infrastructure for AI being built out as well. And also spoke with the operations director there, and the AI infrastructure is actually being built now. Power capacities in place. It's just they haven't signed any ink deal yet. But I think something is stirring up there because they're starting. But I think that 2026 is going to be a big year for them. Where they ramp up very quickly. All right. Well, thank you for asking. So, all right. So, what do you think of CleanSpark Iron in June? So, Alan, I think that in the near term, the miners are going to outperform. We will see that in the month of June, but I think that we're going to see it even more in the month of Q3. But we'll cover that as well. All right. So, strategy MSTR. So, let me just show you the hat that I got during the conference, Strategy B, but on the back. So how much more is MSTR going to post tomorrow? I think somewhere around 12,000. It might be even 20,000. All right, so yeah, I'm loving the questions and all that. Crypto investors. So if Bitcoin tanked, couldn't Michael Saylor buy his next buys from exchanges to stop the crash and push the price back up? So it really depends. It's not only just Saylor buying, because Saylor can stabilize the price action, but now you got a lot of players, right? So like, let's say if you have all the ETFs selling off, I don't think it matters how much Bitcoin Saylor buys up. You need more power. You need more companies. And this is why I think, having the Bitcoin treasury companies adopt Bitcoin, the more people you have on this list, the more it'll stabilize the non-believers of Bitcoin. But MetaPlanet, it was nice to hear, MetaPlanet CEO speak. I think that he's developed a strong partnership with Michael Saylor. So watch out for MetaPlanet. I think the CEO, a lot of people love the CEO, and that's why you have a lot of Americans investing into that company right now. All right, so Thiessen, what is the current resistance level for Mara and CleanSpark? So I will cover that as soon as okay, so maybe let's just switch over. So most of you are wondering, why is it that the miners are underperforming? What's going on with the miners? Well, think about it, this way. The miners, they've gotten beat down for so long, but where there's blood on Wall Street, that's where money's to be made. There's some people, including myself, we may not have the advantage of buying at a lower cost average. Some of you do, so congratulations there. But we're all in here to win it. Okay, it doesn't matter what cost average you have. If you have conviction in these stocks, congratulations. Be part of the team. We will start winning, or we will get back to winning. Even though, let's say if we're down, for example, it's part of, the part is we're doing it together as a team. And just based on technical analysis, we have Mara, Riot, CleanSpark. So key thing is on the daily candle, we're above that Ichimoku cloud. Why am I covering all three? Because these are like the big three HODL stocks, and they generally perform the same when you scale out. One day, one miner might outperform the other. It doesn't matter, but when you scale out, they have a same performance trajectory. You look at it, they're doing the same thing basically. So Mara shows that it broke through that Ichimoku cloud. That's a bull signal. We've seen that since April timeframe. When the RSI was hugely oversold, we also see a reversal with the MACD. That's definitely a key indicator showing that the bull flag price action broke out of the bull flag. We've seen that with Mara. We've seen that with Riot. We've seen that with CleanSpark. That validates the inverse, head and shoulder. So the left shoulder, which I have drawn here, and we have the head drawn here. So now that we've seen the price action break out of that Ichimoku cloud, we're now seeing that right shoulder form. Whether it will continue to go down, yes, there's potential for it to go down, or it may just play out to be a cup and handle forming. So just putting an arrow, we may very well see a cup and handle form and an inverse head and shoulders. So, inverse head and shoulder is like one of the best technical analysis indicators. And I think that while there is room for it to go down, from like where it currently is, like Riot, CleanSpark, CleanSpark can get to like low 8, Riot, can get below 8. But once it establishes that right shoulder, it's going to shoot up. So, I'm thinking that it's going to start bouncing up. It may not even go down even further. It's been beat down for so long, but since that time point of $6, people are pushing the price up, and I think we're going to potentially see a short squeeze coming. All right, so one other stock I want to call out, to consider researching this stock. And again, this isn't financial advice. Always do your research. I definitely do think that DJT stock has potential for a breakout. Why is that the case? Based on fundamentals, we heard about, if I just go back, Trump Media. So they closed a $2.5 billion deal. And what they plan on doing is buying Bitcoin. Even the Trump family was talking about this. Trump media, getting into Bitcoin. That just shows that even the president believes in Bitcoin, and he's putting his money where his mouth is. And by doing this, front running it, this is really going to influence a lot of companies all around the world, even countries, to stack sats, as well as Trump alone, separate from the US SBR plan of 1 million bitcoins under Senator Cynthia Lummis's Bitcoin Act of 2025. So all of that's coming. So definitely very bullish. I think that DJT on the fundamentals, early adopter to embrace Bitcoin, add it to their balance sheet. The fundamentals speak for it, but the technicals, I mean, just look at this. During that Trump election updates around October, November, $54. What happened in during the inauguration, January 2025? It was hovering around that $35. Even before that, that slight mini run up to like $43. What has happened since? During all that tariff news, we saw some upward movement, but this pullback here, think this as a gift. And a lot of people, there were a lot of shorting going on. People took advantage of shorting it because of the updates around, raising ATM, diluting the stock to buy Bitcoin. But that's what other companies are doing right now, raising ATM convertible notes to acquire, Bitcoin with that extra money that's on the table. So I think where DJT is right now, it has huge upside just with the remainder of year 2025. So Sean, your question around Bitcoin. So um, why is Bitcoin going down? So I don't think Bitcoin is going down at all. So the technicals show us that Bitcoin is going up, and it will continue to go up with this bull cycle. Katie, okay, so financial yeah, so definitely some. Thank you for sharing that. A really good deep dive analysis with CleanSpark. So definitely, take advantage of what's out there. But definitely, key thing is, just based on the technicals, no matter how good the fundamentals are, key thing is we're seeing an inverse head and shoulder play out, and that's really going to work towards our advantage. This really is the recipe for price to just shoot up. So if we just let the technical analysis play out, these miners are going to break out. Okay, so TSIN, in terms of resistance, you know I think what we've seen with Mara. Okay, so I'm just going to draw that near term resistance. Okay, so what we saw recently was uh, during May 21st, so a little over a week ago, Mara price got up to $17. Most of you are wondering, okay, so I think it's going to retest that prior resistance definitely in June. 70% chance that it's going to retest that, $17, by next week. Resistance level number two is at that $20. One thing to keep in mind is that prior resistance, I'll set that as a level three. Okay, so most of you are wondering, so when will this happen? So it all depends on Bitcoin. Let's say Bitcoin, it reaches back to 112K. We're definitely going to be somewhere around that 18 $20 for you know if it gets back to 112, we're going to be somewhere around that 1850. I think Bitcoin price gets up to that, over 112, we're going to hit that level two resistance, and then we get to that 120 onward. Mara is going to, have a very fast velocity speed. As Mara goes up, that's where the other miners like Riot and CleanSpark also follow. So we want Mara to go up so that other miners can go up. It can't be the other way around. So these companies go hand in hand together. They work in complementary. So definitely as CleanSpark, let's say, just recently reaching $10, where it currently is 863. I think come next week we're gonna have that double digit be reached again, and then Riot, we had it touch over at $9. So definitely $9 is level one resistance. I think CleanSpark is going to gradually start getting back to that level two resistance. Let me just color it with the same color there. So the resistance lines is for CleanSpark. I think that in June, we're going to reach just $12 as well, which is what we saw, CleanSpark be reached, multiple times, in 2024. In fact, 2024, it was like at $18 at one point. So I think that somewhere in Q3, we're going to go above $18 plus is my guess. Yeah, that's right, Katie. I think that's the beauty of the game. I mean, those who are patient in life, you know, um, you don't lose until you sell. Okay, so even if you're bag holding right now, just remain patient. The game is still playing out, and miners will have a run up. I mean, when you think about Bitcoin as an investment, it's considered more safe. Why? Because it tends to go up. But when you look at miners, I mean, it's been just beat down for a long time now. But what goes down for a long duration of time with high risk, that's where we can see those big banana squeeze like vertical candles coming. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Yeah, that's correct, Thiessen. I think it's there's a number of investors who really look at the financials, like the balance sheet, like accountants and financial analysts. They're big on the money factor, understanding how the company makes money. Are they in the profit territory? What's the risk based on the balance sheet? And if, let's say, Q2, they're able to show that they're making money, their revenue, outperforms their costs, whether it's energy expenditure, overhead costs and all that, then that will really push the price up. And I think that with the FASB change, as we end June, let's say if June is a record number month for Bitcoin price, let's say Bitcoin goes up to like 120, 140,000. You compare last month's closeout, Bitcoin was 74,000 compared to like 140,000. That's double the price for each Bitcoin held. So let's say if you look at like Mara, for example, 50,000 Bitcoins, right? And you double up your income because each Bitcoin price has appreciated. We understand Bitcoin is accretive, and if the last, because of FASB change, these companies are now able to report the value of Bitcoin at the end of each quarter. Q1 to compare to Q2, let's say if the forecast plays out, Bitcoin goes to 140,000, versus, end of Q2 versus Q1, that's 100% gain on each Bitcoin value. So the balance sheet is going to show a big run up with the price, and I think that's really going to, create some large movements. To your point, Thiessen. Yeah, you're welcome, Sean, and would appreciate sharing it to your network. Subscribing as well, turning on the bell notification. I definitely cover a lot of Riot, Riot, Mara, CleanSpark. I know Katie's a big time CleanSpark, T-Sin, Mara, CleanSpark, Sean, Riot. So I cover all of that, and welcome any questions as well, because I think that these Bitcoin Treasury stocks do have potential. Q1 was a bad year. We had a lot of uncertainty going on, but I think that we have a strong bullish case for the rest of the year. So we definitely have some upside coming for us. So I think there's definitely money to be made in at least the miners. Strategy as well. I'm a big time believer of strategy, and also just took a hedge with DJT on Friday, just because I think that the stock is hugely undervalued. So wanted to share that play. Jerry Mackey joining. So Jerry Mackey, definitely a ninja out in the field. I really do appreciate Jerry. He definitely shares very good technical analysis. So Jerry, he has forecast of like Riot, for example, going to $150. So Jerry, if you don't mind, just putting your case analysis as to why you think the miners are going to be running up sometime by October timeframe is your guess, right? I think people want to hear that. Yeah, but one of the things that I really like just showing is the inverse head and shoulders that we're seeing. We also see this with Mara as well. Same thing playing out. It's like a happy face, right? So the opposite of the inverse head and shoulder is what you don't want to see. You see a high head, but we see a low head, meaning that the support is established. That's the basement low, and it's until we get that right shoulder formation or the cup and handle, if you will, is where we take off. So we can also see a cup and handle forming, which I'm drawing, and then that's when we're off to the races. Also a cup and handle forming right here. I know I'm like drawing over all the lines, but you got the inverse head and shoulder, cup and handle forming. So the technicals are showing that we're going to have a big run up. Yeah. So Jerry, give us the goods, like what Katie is saying. Why should we be bullish? I think Jerry's gonna give you the technicals, but I can maybe Jerry doesn't want me to share, but I think you know so he's saying we are a week, if not days, for the last great buying opportunity in miners. All right, so that's a good point. Let me bring up the charts that Jerry has shared with me. All right, so this is one example. Okay, so that's one of Jerry's. All right, so this is Riot Platforms. So estimated top beginning of October. So what Jerry is saying is, so we've seen these every Bitcoin bull cycle, we see miners pump. That's why we don't see miners, correlating with Bitcoin quite just yet, because it has a delay factor. But 2017, we see a run up. 2020, we see a run up. This applies to CleanSpark and Mara as well. So we're just using Riot for an example. So we haven't seen any run up yet, while Bitcoin is going up. So what Jerry is drawing out, his estimated top beginning of October, $150 is his price predictions. So there you go. That's Jerry's technical analysis right there. He's bullish that Riot's going to be going to 150. What does that mean for Mara CleanSpark? Well, hopefully it hits this number. Why? Because we'll be making some big bucks if that's the case. But key thing is there's always a bull run in the miners. We just got to be patient. So like what Katie's pointing out, you know. All right, so this is the fractal chart that Jerry's talking about here. Okay, so it looks like Jerry has June timeframe, which we're now in June. We're going to see that gradual run up, that gradual movement up. That's so funny. God candle, all miners 5x by Christmas, and I'll flash Santa for fun. I think Jerry and Sean would be very surprised if that were to happen, along with Thiessen. But at that point, you got to close your eyes, and not peek when that happens. So that's a good one. All right, well, we've gone past the hour. Santa does that's definitely funny. Yeah, so key takeaway, remain patient, dollar cost average. Bitcoin is, it's in that price discovery phase. I think that where we are with Bitcoin currently, at the 105,000, definitely bullish with Bitcoin. People were getting a little worried. We're at 112,000, and people worried about Bitcoin going down to 103,000. But here's the thing: we're at that new base. Think about it: Bitcoin at a support level of 100,000. The psychology has changed where we broke 100,000 as a prior resistance, but now Bitcoin going down, where it's not even at that close to 100,000, but that's really the support. Things have really changed. And as we get towards, Q2 earnings report for the miners and Bitcoin treasury stocks, we're going to have, fireworks come. So definitely some huge upside. And definitely, follow me on X if you haven't already done so. I put, posts out there, and definitely a community where we can follow one another. But again, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and we'll do this live session again. And come tomorrow, how much will Sailor stack? How big of an orange dot do you think Sailor will announce come tomorrow? So definitely some nice upward movements coming. So yes, thank you, Katie. Thanks, Sean, Thiessen, everyone, for watching today. Really appreciate it. Okay, you all have a great Sunday. Take care. Thanks, JG. Thanks, Jared, for stopping by, man. I really appreciate it. You're the ninja, man. All right, let's make that big bucks, and let's hope for Santa to have Katie do what she promised. Take care, guys.